Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. This is such a cool, kind of intimate space and a very nice crowd. So I'm gonna talk to you about sort of my background a little bit and how I came to write this book, A Terrible Country. Thank you. And I guess there's no questions, so I will happily answer further questions as I sign your book that you have purchased in the back. Okay. So I was born in Russia in the mid-1970s, and my parents brought me over when I was 6 years old. I felt as a kind of, in my childhood, I felt like they were sending me a sort of mixed messages. On the one hand, Russia was the place where all good books and movies and poetry and art came from. And, in our house, when there was a new Russian book or a new Russian magazine, my mom would bring it home. If there was a Russian movie playing somewhere in Brookline or downtown Boston, we would make a big evening out of it. On the other hand, Russia was also the place that we ran away from because they were mean to us, and a kind of horrible place, and we should never go back there. So it was confusing to me growing up which of those two messages was the kind of one that I should listen to. And for most of my childhood, I kind of accepted the second message, that Russia was horrible and that we had left. It seemed to me like my parents had emigrated to the Russia that was inside America. And it was kind of amazing how many Russian people they knew. Like not only were all their friends Russian, but our pediatrician was Russian, our dentist was Russian, our mechanic was Russian. If we had a birthday party, the clown who came was Russian. So I kind of felt like my parents had emigrated, to this Russian side of America, and I would have to emigrate again, right, to kind of leave. And I was very busy doing that basically throughout my childhood and adolescence. And then my mom died right before I was a senior in high school. And that kind of ruptured our connection to Russian culture. And I had to kind of decide when I got to college the next year, whether I was going to try to reestablish that connection. And I decided that I would, kind of as an experiment, take some classes in Russian history and literature, and I found it very interesting, and then I started going over there. And I first went over there in 1995, which was, it was just crazy. It was the craziest thing I'd ever seen, right? It was kind of personally enlightening because it was the place that my parents had come from. So all these things about my parents that I found embarrassing or mysterious or weird were sort of clarified for me by visiting their parents and going to the places where they had once been, and meeting people who were a lot like them but who had stayed in Russia. But more than that, it was just this insane time. The most striking thing, there were two really striking kind of things that I remember from the mid-90s. One was currency exchanges. There was a currency exchange on every block, right? And what that meant was that the ruble, the home currency, if you look around, there's not a lot of currency exchanges in New York, right? Because we have a pretty solid currency called the dollar. But the ruble had collapsed. It was totally unstable. As soon as anybody got any rubles, they would transfer them to dollars, right? If they wanted to buy something, then they would have to transfer them back into rubles. So you needed a lot of currency exchanges. So you had this kind of visible manifestation of instability in these kind of proliferating currency exchanges. The other thing was these guys, these big guys with shaved heads, leather jackets and tracksuits under the leather jackets. These later came to be known as violent entrepreneurs. But basically they were signaling with the leather jackets that they were cool and tough, but with the tracksuit that they were, ready to kick you in the head if they had to, and jeans are too constricting to kick someone in the head, apparently. And this was not the Russia that I expected to find, both from the kind of stories that my parents had told me, which were stories of Russian intellectuals and artists and writers. also not the Russia that I had been led to believe existed in the New York Times. Right, the New York Times, Russia was, was going through some difficult times, but it was going to emerge into a kind of a capitalist, kind of normal capitalist country like Germany or maybe Poland, right? And that's a joke because, well, anyway, at the time Poland was doing really well. And the kind of thing that I learned there, which I had not learned in my so far quite expensive education, was that capitalism wasn't so great, right? I mean, this was what capitalism looked like, right? And what capitalism looked like when you kind of tore away, 200 years of accumulated wealth was violence, right? Dispossession. I saw as my grandmother lost her life savings. I saw as people were, violently attacked. It was really ugly, right? And I began to think really seriously about what that meant for capitalism over here. And so from then on, but also it was just the most interesting thing I'd ever seen in my life. And I kind of started going back and forth to Russia as much as I could. I started writing about it. The kind of message that I was trying to communicate when I was writing about Russia as a journalist, as a translator, was it's not what they say in the papers, and what capitalism is doing to them, it's going to do to us eventually. But nobody cared. People would say, Keith, I liked your article. Feel like it really gave a kind of depth of kind of explanation to what's going on over in Russia. And tell me, isn't Putin a really nasty fellow? Right? And I was like, no, that's not the point. The point is Putin is the product of historical forces, right? Putin comes out of the trauma of the 90s, which I witnessed, right? That's why people turn to Putin. Putin's an answer to that. He's a bad answer. I have 5 minutes left? Okay. I might go a little bit over that, but okay. He's the wrong answer, right? He's the wrong answer, but he's an answer, right? He's an answer to a trauma. He's a reaction to a trauma. Anyway, so in 2008, I went over to Russia for family reasons. My grandmother was getting old, couldn't really take care of herself. My older sister was leaving the country on a fellowship and asked if I could keep an eye on our grandmother, so I did. And I spent a year with her, and it was very intense, very sad, very difficult. I certainly didn't think I was going to write about it. I was kind of working as a journalist and translator over there. I had other things to do, and I was kind of just mostly kind of focused on trying to figure out how I could help her. When I got back after that year, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It just struck me as kind of the most intense experience that I'd had in a long time. And I started writing it down. I started writing down what had happened, what it was like, what it felt like. And then I was like, oh, well, here I am writing a novel about Russia. I never thought I would write a novel about Russia. I didn't really think I knew enough about it. Here is my chance to denounce Russian capitalism. So for many years, kind of an embarrassingly a large number of years, I was writing these kind of two books together. I was writing a book about a guy who goes and takes care of his grandmother, and then I was also writing a denunciation of Russian capitalism. And one of those books was pretty good, and the other, it will surprise you to learn, the one that was a denunciation of Russian capitalism, that was really boring. That was a really boring book. And it took me a long time to understand that. I remember very well the moment where I kind of printed out this draft of this double book, and it was like 600 pages. And I sat down and I started reading it, and I was like, oh my God, it's unreadable. I can't read it. And I thought, well, if I can't read it, and I wrote it, who exactly is going to read this book? So I started cutting stuff out, and I figured out that what the book really needed to be about the grandmother. And that actually it was this grandmother who was the one who had been dispossessed. and traumatized, and who had lost not only her life savings, her kind of professional life, but also her kind of sense of herself in the world. And that was going to be maybe an imperfect argument against Russian capitalism, but that's what this book needed to be. So it's still a denunciation of Russian capitalism, but you may not even notice as you read it. It'll just kind of lodge itself in your mind. It's been a very interesting experience the last few years with all the Russia stuff going on. I remember very vividly, so it took me, I started writing this book in 2009. 2014 rolls around, I'm still writing the book, right? And, suddenly Russia annexes part of Ukraine, you might remember? And everybody's talking about Russia, right? And I'm like, fuck. I should have written this book faster. Now would be the time to publish this book. People finally care about Russia, and they're going to forget in a week. This has happened before, but luckily, the Russians hacked our election. And so people have continued to care about Russia. And I have very mixed feelings about that, as you can imagine. Because the Russians did it, they did it, right? I'm not coming here to tell you they didn't do it, they did it. They hacked the DNC, they phished Podesta, they did all of it. They went on Facebook and bought ads. I think they even might have swung 100,000 votes in the 3 states where they needed to swing 100,000 votes. But I don't think 62 million Americans voted for Donald Trump because of Russia, right? I think we did it. That was us. And we need to kind of face that. And much as I enjoy all the Russia attention and find it profitable, not really, but like a little profitable. I think it's a mistake. So it's been, I've been full of ambivalence. And I guess just kind of to end, I feel like the thing that we learn from the Russian experience with Putin, right? The Russian liberals have been saying for 18 years now, they have been saying Putin's a very bad man. He's a very nasty man. And if we can just get rid of Putin, we'll get our country back. And Putin is a bad man, and he is a nasty man, but that's a mistake, right? And the people who support Putin because he answers some need that they have, they can't hear that. We have a different situation here, but it's not that different. So go out and vote, and thank you.